Just for those who don't want to know me, I am Khalid Janahi. I am the jury member of TAKREEM. And you'll be with me for the next 45 minutes. We're going to be discussing one or two nice issues here with three wonderful, well-accomplished people in their fields. But before I start calling them, I would like to congratulate our man, Mr. Ricardo Karam, for wonderful 10 years. And hopefully it's going to be another 30 years going from now on. So let me call upon the three wonderful people. Karen Frank, who is the CEO of private banking arm of Barclays Bank and the overseas services at the same time. Please, Karen, give her a big hand. Next, Fadumo Dayib, as we call her, Fadumo Dayib. She is a politician, she is an activist, so please, from Somalia, and we're very pleased to have her. Please. Last but not least, the European editor of CNN, Nina de Santos. Please. Just for the sake of clarity, it's going to be a 45-minute session. Hopefully half an hour of inter-discussion, and then we'll leave 15 minutes for Q&As from the floor. So please think of hard questions for these wonderful people. Thank you very much. The session is all about, basically, women setting the agenda of the world, the new agenda. Now, when I got that, I thought they are already setting the agenda. Now, it's already been going on. We have today women in leadership positions when we look across the world in a lot of important positions. So if we look at something that we, the Arabs, love, arms, three of the top CEOs in the United States arm production are women. When we look at the Congress, over 104 today, which I think is a record, are women. And the Speaker, who was the first ever woman Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, still the Speaker of the House. So we have that. We are in a country where in the past 40 years, we've had 2 women in the position of Prime Minister. Actually, the first one actually took this country from the dark ages to the real world. And the second one, who's now the incumbent, she is, well, let's be fair. It's a difficult position to be in. I just wonder if there was a man in her position, the way he would react to this element of a divided country the way it is. So I think on a personal basis, as much as I am anti-Brexit, I think she is doing the best she can to take this thing forward and keeping the country together. I don't think a man would do that because being a man, we are less wise than the woman in the room. So, right, I will take you, I mean, as I said in the pre-meeting, that is going to be a discussion. So it's left for you. I mean, I'm just going to sit here and listen to you guys. But let me start with just dropping a subject for you, and that is, and I start from the last subject, which is an important subject, and that is basically the issue of the elephant in the room. Okay, the elephant in the room being that regardless how hard women work in a career and the talent basically gets wasted a lot of times because of the reality of having children, getting married, and everything else. So I'm just wondering, the three of you, how do you react to that? How you've dealt with it? And more importantly, what is your suggestion in terms of, since you are setting the agenda for the future, what is your suggestion to go forward? Please, Karen.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting us to speak about the topic. It's obviously very near and dear to our hearts and many hearts, and something that we are trying to tackle, and it's appreciated that it's on people's minds in this room as well. I'd also like to just challenge one thing that you said, since we're going to make this tough on you. Don't be scared. But I also don't view the fact that, people, and women in particular, but people tend to take time out for family or children, or as we grow older to take care of our parents, et cetera. I think those are wonderful choices. I think that those are very valuable choices, and the point is that it's meant to be each individual's choice. And one of the things I try to be very vocal about to the women that I speak to all of the people and younger generations that I speak to, is I also took time out. And, you know, as we think about the longevity of careers, not trying to pack everything in, not trying to measure our progress by any defined way, we think about our careers as being a marathon, not a race, as being something where we're meant to be enlightened, where there's a social contract between what do I want to achieve, how do I want to spend my time and my days. We do have, I think, a more enlightened ability to think about our goals and aspirations, including bringing family, bringing a variety of goals all together as part of our life and our career. And I think that those are not things that should be mutually exclusive. So I'll throw it a little bit to my fellow panelists, Fatuma or Nina.
Nina. I think actually, well, there's many things that unite us here on this panel and in this room. I know that we're all achieving career women who have made an effort not to compromise in our ambitions, but we're all also mothers. I personally can speak for being a mother very recently. I have a 1-year-old at home and a 3.5-year-old at home, and a full-time challenging job. And I think what's important as well is that we are examples for our children, for our future generations. We're also examples for other women who work inside our firms. And, you know, whether it's in the sphere of politics, the media, or business, we can all make a difference by making an example. But it is, I would say, still slightly depressing that the glass ceiling is there, and that it feels like concrete when you hit it. I think many people all around the world will recognize that dynamic. In some ways, I think culturally, it needs politics, business, the public image of the media as well, to try and get the critical mass to try and culturally change that dynamic. And I think you can't do it without all three parts of the equation. I don't know if you agree.
I do. I'm actually born into a society where 80% of the women are actually playing the role of the father and the mother. My mother also lived that reality. And when I say 80% of a society that is actually comprised of single mothers, it doesn't actually mean they're divorcees or anything like that, but it means also we have men who are not playing their role. And so I was born into that society. I don't know anything else other than that. And so even though I was married, I was actually the breadwinner. I was the husband and I was the wife, all rolled into one, and so many other things. And that's a lived reality. If you look at Africa, that's a reality that a lot of women actually live in. And so it's very difficult to talk about any other existence other than that. And I think women are really quite strong. They're very resilient. Of course, they don't choose that kind of reality, but that's what we deal with, and we deal with it quite competently. So we're able to actually be professional mothers while also taking care of many other responsibilities.
It's interesting you say that. We talked earlier about matriarchal societies and how wonderful it is to have role models. I have 3 sons. And, it is a situation where, how do I actually get them to fully appreciate, women and the power of women living in a dynamic where, we have 2 very strong sort of alpha people as parents. And the interesting part is it does a lot come back to role model. It really does. I put my boys through co-ed school so that they would grow up with women, with girls, at a point where girls were faster, smarter, and literally could beat them up if they wanted to, and I let them do it. But more importantly, what I found later in life is that the best, and I do want to tell one story, so forgive me, but the best thing I can do for them is actually be their mom, right? To actually show as a role model somebody who is, has career aspirations, who wants to do something. Particularly in the mantra in our household is no, everyone contributes. We don't distinguish between men or women. We don't distinguish roles between men or women. Everybody contributes pretty much through life, and raising the boys that way. I did go through, as I mentioned, I did go through a point where I almost, stepped away a bit from my career, and I had to rethink. It was a bit too much. And later in life, you always think, did I do everything I was supposed to? And the one validating point I had at Barclays, and forgive me for my small story, is, I got my big job. I'm a CEO of a business, et cetera, and I had this big town hall, about 2,000 people all piped in through video, and I'm up giving my speech. And what I didn't realize is that my two eldest sons had basically conspired with my assistant. They dressed up nicely, put on a suit and tie, and they snuck into the back of the room. And at the end of my town hall, everybody's filing out. My kids come right, Mama, that was great. And they're going crazy and giving me great big hugs. And for me, that was it. That was it. My kids, far from being the ones who said, why weren't you there for me? Did you miss a school play? They're probably the ones in my entire life who are the most proud of me, right? And who recognize women as being leaders, and women that they go to advise, and women as real contributors. And for me, that's probably the biggest takeaway I have in terms of how we can change some of those dynamics. And, Fadumo, I think about, you being the role model for your children, or wider in the, the places where, Somalia, where you come from. It almost heartens me to see the change in the dynamic from what we typically see here in London or in Europe.
Actually, that brings me to a point of retaining talent. Okay, now, what would be a pragmatic way for all three of you, and in different businesses, and business, and social justice perspective, and media, and in society as a whole, how to retain the best talent? So what I'm getting at is meritocracy and quota at the same time here. So I'm bringing three subjects into one, because I'm very careful with time here, and since you're going through it. So let's touch upon those three together, please. Karen.
So I'll tell you a quick story. So I'm the dumb one in the family. My elder sister works for Google. She designs a lot of if you wear an Android anything, that's probably her design. And there was a sort of pointed time when Google went through its own hiccup in terms of diversity. And they all kind of, all the senior women's got called into a room, and they said, well, what's going on? We promote you, we do all of this stuff, we throw money at you. What is going on? Why can't we keep you? Because when you leave, you just walk out the door. We don't see it coming, et cetera. And that's a phenomenon that we have a lot in the finance world. How do we keep our people? And she said, they thought about it. She said, you know what? We're bored. We're just bored. We get so valuable to the organization doing the same thing that we do all the time. We do it, we do more of it, we do more of it, and you become to see us in this very confined way. You see my contribution is the job that I do rather than the person that I am and everything that I have to contribute. And that's something that I said, number one, two takeaways. Number one, even they can get bored at Google. But number two is, there is a point, and I'm sure we're about to talk about the gender pay gap. I'm going to hand it back to you ladies to do that. We'll talk about the gender pay gap, and yes, I do like to be valued for the contribution that I make, but you also have to make it interesting. I cannot come to work 12, 14, 16 hours a day, leave my children, leave all of the other pursuits that I want, and be bored. It just doesn't work.
I think there also has to be opportunities. One of the great potential things that I've seen in some organizations, which I'd like to see more widespread, is if, say, somebody is going to take time out for a family, is even before they do, to make sure that they have a career vision and a career path that they can try and keep to, and that they could have an assigned manager who they will continue to have an ongoing dialogue with, even if sometimes it's just informal and a cup of coffee. I think that sometimes makes a huge difference in terms of retaining talent, even if, and you can form these ad hoc relationships, by the way. They don't necessarily have to be specific mentoring schemes, so I do think it's best if they are formalized. But that, I think, as you said, keeps people feeling like they're being invested in, they're invested in the system, continue to be invested in the company, in their career, and it gives them a vision of what they want to achieve as well as their family.
Fadumo?
Okay, I find the notion of meritocracy quite interesting, and who, against what criteria are we measuring people, and who has decided the criteria that they should be actually measured against. And I say this in relations to the quota, which is the quota for women. It's you need affirmative action for women to actually enter decision-making spheres. And oftentimes you hear men say, well, what's the point of having all these women in these spaces? And they didn't come here based on merit. Mm-hmm. And to me, I find that quite amusing, because those men are in those spaces because they happen to be men. That's the only merit. Okay, not all, but some. For some. They're in those spaces because of their male privilege. Mm. And so I find this quite contentious, particularly in a society like Somalia, where we've been fighting to have the 30% gender quota. Mm-hmm. And actually, the quota is decided by clan elders, because we don't have democratic governance systems in Somalia. And what the clan elders will normally do is they will pick women based on how timid they are. That is the criteria that they use. You know, women that will not challenge them, that will not cause problems, that are supposed to be the good women. And so the 30% or you know, the affirmative action is for quality representation. Mm-hmm. And so if you bring women who are not able to articulate anything, they're not able to fight for other women, you actually take away the power of that quota. So merit is very important, no doubt, but also affirmative action is just as important.
That's an interesting. Would that be? I mean, that's Somalia, and I fully am Somalia, say, and the Arab world. But do you think in the West that applies, or do you think it's merit number one, quota number two?
I'm always with merit. I can't help it.
Okay.
It's always merit. I mean, that is what we're here to do, is merit. But I completely agree with Fadumo for slightly different reasons, and I heard the chuckle over here. Merit, and don't disparage people who are in their position, because I think it takes a lot of skills for people to succeed over life, right? And those skills include many things. It includes, in some cases, you know, things that we learn in university or science or math or just grit or getting in there. But the point is the skills and the merit, that how we judge that merit for anyone in a role, how we judge merit, what the merit is of putting somebody into a promoted position, for example. The thing that needs to change is the measurement and the skills that we look for. And as we sit there, and I think at this point, the case for diversity, okay, we all know that. Diversity in and of itself is beneficial. It doesn't matter if we're talking about the ecological benefit to the planet or whether we're talking about the workforce. It is undeniable. And the problem that we have is not the fact that the women aren't merited or the men are more merited. It's the fact that we continue to use the same box to judge merit over time, not realizing that what you need is a wider range of skill set. And people may fill this skill set or this skill set or this skill set. And what we challenge ourselves to do in our organization at Barclays is to say, look, show me a range, right? Show me different types of talent, because I'm not just looking for more of you and you and you and you and you, so I can get 10 of you because you're really good at what you do. What I'm trying to do is find a team that complements, that challenges, that evolves, right? That has a balance and a mix of skills that really takes us and makes us able to do something really different. And I think, again, exactly to your point, where society has had very little progress, and I will say it that way, is getting people in positions of power to think outside the proverbial box. Stop looking for more of the same. Start looking for that wider range.
But that takes a huge amount of effort, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. It takes a huge amount of corporate investment in time and effort. It also requires a longer-term investment horizon, doesn't it? And many listed companies have shareholders asking for immediate returns. They're quite used to looking over a shorter period of time that would require.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, I mean, today in Financial Times, it was about the investment banking arm and the chief executive talking about that going from a director to a managing director, only the ones who are good enough will go there. So how would something like that get into basically getting what I would say the 40% quota going for women, or 50, it could be all of them, 100% going women and 100% men?
Well, look, Fadumo and I were discussing this earlier. I mean, I think that we do need to have something that is a shift change. So setting today's market, the quarter to quarter aside, I think the only way that we actually get the enforcement to make a real shift change as we do, and we've seen it in places like Norway, places like France that have gone through and legislated. They've simply said 40%, or they've picked a number that is relatively achievable and said 40% of all boards need to have women on them. Okay, or 40% composition of all boards need to have 40% women. And the point of that really is that a few years on, number one, they started documenting the benefits of it. Again, it is in of itself an inherently beneficial thing to do. And number two, nobody really notices it anymore. There's always the big where are we going to find qualified women? They're out there, I promise you. Okay, what are they going to do on the boards? Really good things, I promise you that as well, right? And literally, having gone through that, I call it the baseball bat, having gone through and taken the baseball bat to these glass ceilings, you've gone through and changed the business paradigm through legislation that allows us to then see the benefits, where until that happens, we're just going to see resistance. And I would say that, 3-4 years ago, I never would have said that. I'm just not a believer in quotas. As a one-time change, I think it's almost become somewhat necessary. I'm as impatient with the pace of change as anyone. So
I do think I have mixed feelings about quotas, just like you, Karen. I remember at Davos about 4 years ago, moderating a panel with Christine Lagarde and a few of the CEOs of the Fortune 500 companies, and we came to the conclusion that quotas was a blunt tool that was needed, as you said, to make sure that they're not needed for the next generation. I'd agree with that. If you take a look at, for instance, the pay differential results here in the United Kingdom for the last 2 years, companies with more than 200 staff have been forced to publish their median pay gaps, and frankly, we haven't seen a huge amount of progress between last year and this year. What happens there? Do women just recuse themselves from the workforce? No. So their legislation is helpful. But when you look at quotas, sometimes you can find situations where boards are filled up with part-time non-executive director positions that are offered to females rather than senior executive roles. And I think there needs to be, people need to be very, very careful that there isn't a certain element of tokenism that creeps in because of quotas. So quotas, yes, but used wisely, and then not needed to be used thereafter.
Actually, you just mentioned Davos, the big stage for everybody getting together. I remember 10 years ago, something like that, 12 years ago, when they changed the system at the World Economic Forum, saying for all strategic partners, because they have 5 allotments, that at least 1 should be a woman and could be 4 men.
Didn't work then, did it?
But what happened actually, that some of them used to come with 4 men only, or with a woman just for the sake of just making up the numbers. And that has not worked well from that aspect. So I think you are there on merit, but there are a lot of people who go there who are not on merit just to make up the numbers. And that
or
actually,
accept a position
to do that. But I'd like to bring a point which you've been touching upon, and I think it's important, but I'd like to mix it with another one, because it's nice to see you guys talking to each other. And that is the pay gap. That's number one. But taking into consideration the pay gap, the way it's going, not just in this country, everywhere in the world, that's number one. Number two, which is a very important thing, going forward, AI is taking over a lot of work, tens of millions of jobs of middle-income people, be it in banks, be it in accounting firms, be it in even in legal firms. I mean, it's just taking jobs away. How would you, with all that element of gender gap itself, okay, with this thing which is the AI taking over everybody, okay, the men, women, everybody is just basically their jobs have been slashed and it's going to go away. Something has to come up. How would you, since you are setting the agenda for the future, how would you deal with that? With coming, of course, with the gender pay gap too. Karen.
I think people, first of all, have to recognize, so for me, there's no big surprise that we haven't had year-on-year change, and we're not going to have year-on-year change. This has been a problem, unquantified, but it's been a problem for 20-some years, 30 years, I don't want to date myself, but 30-some years that I've been in the industry. And the issue is this, that the pyramid in most financial institutions looks like this, which means that we try to do the right thing every year by our intake. Our intake is generally about 50-50, right? In some cases, we actually stack the deck and we make it 60% women, right? We're desperate to get the women. The problem is that as you start going up, and the farther you go up, it becomes male and male and male. And at the top, it's almost all male. So you can imagine that the highest paid ones are at the top, the lowest paid are at the bottom. And when you do the basic averages, so the gap between the average woman and the average man, there's just no way you're going to change that over the course of a year. And that actually accounts for why that gap is so wide. What it doesn't say, and what is almost more important to me, not fully, is the fact that for the same job, man or woman, for the same performance, I expect to be paid the same. And that's where we can definitely make more progress in terms of going through. We've seen this come through in media, et cetera, where news announcers, for example, have realized that their male counterparts are paid 3 times as much. Movie actors, I love it, turning it down, saying either all of the star cast is paid the same, or we're just not doing this. I love people making a stand for those types of things. From an AI perspective,
It's tricky, isn't it? Because it takes a long time to encourage, well, I've moderated discussions about AI and the robotization of the workforce, irrespective of the gender issues that will throw up. And the answer is often very much from, let's say, the global elite, that people need to retrain, that people should be going to university studying different jobs, STEM subjects, et cetera, especially when it comes to women university graduates are very often in some countries outperforming male university graduates. They are taking these subjects. But I think it's true, you're right, it's estimated about 75 million jobs could be at risk. And very often, women can't make it past a certain pay grade because the glass ceiling sort of stops them there. And I think that also makes them vulnerable to the changes in the workforce that are going to happen over the next few years. So it kind of needs to be a tandem approach.
I have trouble with the AI agenda in that. I mean, if you look through the past massive changes and shifts in the economy, you've seen basically a rebalancing along different skill sets that become important, different parts of the economy that emerge, et cetera. AI, I think, will be evolved, and I struggle similar to you that I don't know if you ladies see a gender-specific outcome that AI would create as an impact versus, I think that people have to prepare themselves for a changing workforce, and to some extent we're already doing that.
Fadumo?
Yeah, we're talking quite a lot about structural changes in legislation. And actually, I want to come back to the issue of the gender quota, affirmative action. Mm-hmm. When I was running for office, I actually felt very strongly that I should be chosen as the president based on merit. I was competing against 21 men. I didn't say choose me because I happen to be a woman. I said choose me because I'm the most educated of all these men, and I actually was. And so I do believe in that sense that merit is very important. But you also need really affirmative action to open that door, the glass ceiling that you're talking about, to actually, kick it down so that other women can actually enter that space. That was one issue I felt I needed to actually elaborate more on. And then, going beyond legislation, really it is important that at the societal level that we also instigate social change. Mm-hmm. It's incredible that we are still talking about women and their rights, and that they have to be, in certain spaces, they have to have equal pay, they have to do all of these things. And this discussion is a never-ending discussion. Okay. And so the only way we can go beyond that is coupled with the legislation, is really to change that perception so that society understands that in order for it to prosper, it must have 50% of its population being part of development. It's like trying to fly with one wing. It's not going to happen. And so it really starts at that level for people to understand what that means when it is translated into money. What does it mean when you have 50% of the population up and running? And what does it mean for that country and for that society? And so also there was the issue of upbringing. We all have children. Mm-hmm. I have a boy. Well, actually, he's a man. He's going to be 23, and his name is Bilal. And I train him just like I would train a cat or or whatever, on how to become a responsible man, how he needs to take care of his wife, how he needs to take care of his house, how he needs to cook, and, really making him understand the value of a woman, so that I don't have to go through what I went through and what my mother went through. And so really, education also is very important in addition to legislation and, social change.
I would call that role modeling. And I thank you for doing that, first of all, and for bringing up the point of the quotas again, because you're right, we have to start someplace, and that's the whole point of it. And even to your point before, and I hear you, nobody is looking for tokenism, right? And even because you look at the typical board composition, 7, 9 people, whatever it is, the vast majority are going to be non-execs. That's just the way it is. The interesting part is this, okay? If you switch it over and it's 40% women, who is the group that's going to elect the next or appoint the next CEO and the next execs? And suddenly, versus being all men, you now have 40% women who vote. So the start is getting the balance, and the next generation is actually seeing the change. And that's why I think from the macro perspective, from the at-home, we all have to feel part of that in whatever way we can.
I think I've been given 5 minutes to wrap it up. So that leaves me with 2 questions from the floor, if there are any questions. Any questions from the floor?
We had a meeting in Manila last year in November, and the Kuwait Red Crescent Society had an initiative, which was that we created a fund for empowerment of women. I'm always for women, all my life. And we've created that fund, and together with the International Federation for the Red Cross and Red Crescent. Why should women get quota? I think men should get quota instead of women getting quota.
Good one.
So I think what you all are doing is fantastic, and keep on doing it until men give up. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you very much, Dr. Hilal. Just in wrapping up, in 1 minute each, what would be your top #1 advice to basically, in terms of helping women in leadership, the young women coming up?
You were a role model well before you realize it. I always tell the story. When I was an analyst, I thought the associate sitting next to me was God, right? When I was an associate, I looked over and said, the VP has an office. Wow, right? Women as role models is probably the most important thing, to be the person who says it can be done, to pull the people up, to mentor, to sponsor, to train, to speak for, in all of those ways. And it starts literally from a very young age. And you need women to remember that and to keep on pushing through and to not give up, because it's not just for them. It's all of the women who are actually watching them and trying to be them. And that's the most important thing I've seen in my career.
Well, I think as a woman, it's important that we mentor, we coach younger women. When we open the door for them and we actually kick the door down for them, we need to bring them along with us, because what happens is when we reach certain positions, we as women, we tend to actually, we have this queen bee syndrome, which means we just want to occupy that space and make sure that no other woman enters that. And we can be very vicious in doing that. So I want us to really look at younger women as the reason why we are doing the things that we are doing. We all stood on women's shoulders, giants who were, before us, and we should be those giants for the younger generation that is coming after us. So I believe in nurturing, in mentoring, in coaching, and in really walking along with them until they reach where we've reached. And I think it's very important to do that.
I'm so glad somebody mentioned the queen bee syndrome. Thank you. That's the other elephant in the room, I suppose, thus far we haven't mentioned. I think that, and you also touched on this, Fadumo, before, is the value of a woman. I think the true value of a woman is unlocked by a woman valuing herself. And so a lot of what we've talked about is extraneous factors, but a lot of it also has to come from within, a deep sense of belief that you do have a voice, you have the right to use it, and you should feel confident about it. And I think for women coming up through the ranks, I totally agree with you, mentoring, nurturing, sharing information, but also in today's day and age where everybody has a voice on social media as long as they use it wisely, it's not a bad thing if you're coming up through your career to invest in yourself, invest in your image, and invest in making your voice heard.
Thank you very much. Actually, my late mother, who was very close to me and my role model, she always used to say, the number of times that I saw, she used to say, by looking into my eyes, saying, we women are born with wisdom in our DNA. You men have to attain it. And tonight has not been an exception. Thank you very, very much. Join me in doing it.